Well, the Chancellor's biggest problem looks like the fact that the Office of Budget Responsibility is going to downgrade its view about what's going to happen to productivity going forward. Now that matters because that means the economy will grow less quickly and therefore less tax revenue will come in. Now the Chancellor has said that he's absolutely committed to getting us to budget balance by the mid-2020s, but if the economy's growing less and there's less tax revenue going to come in, that's going to be even more difficult than it looks at the moment. And on the other hand, he's really under a lot of pressure to increase spending, not to decrease it. We know that public sector pay is under pressure. There are big cuts still to come in welfare benefits, and the NHS and social care and other bits of public services we know are not performing as we would like. So on the one hand, he's likely to have to cut spending in order to meet his fiscal targets. On the other, he's under pressure to increase spending. What can he do about that? Well, it's a genuinely difficult bind. If he's serious about his fiscal rules, then he won't be able to give in to the pressures of demands for much more in the way of spending. If he gives in to the demands for spending, then that's pretty much a statement that his fiscal rules are out of the window. As ever, the Chancellor faces a balancing act. If he does spend more, if he's not going to meet his fiscal rules, then that's more borrowing, more debt, and we have to pay that off in the end. The other thing, of course, that he's facing is a very unusual amount of uncertainty about where the economy is going to go. Not only don't we know what the impact of Brexit is going to be, we don't even know what Brexit is going to look like. So one of the risks associated with abandoning fiscal rules now is that you may have to sort of abandon them again, as it were, in a couple of years' time if the economy does particularly badly. So it may be that his best route at the moment is to do very little and leave himself with a little bit of room for manoeuvre later on. Well, the spring budget was very small, and the biggest thing in it, which was the increase in national insurance for the self-employed, didn't happen either. So it was even smaller than it looked 24 hours after it had been delivered. Now, the political pressure on Mr. Hammond must be to do something much more substantive this time round. It's going to be quite difficult for a Chancellor in his first budget in the new Parliament, remember, not to do very much. The question for him is, what has he got the room to do? He couldn't even get a small tax rise through back in March. With a diminished parliamentary majority, it's going to be even more difficult to get tax rises through this time. So he's going to have to be quite clever and do more than we'd normally expect a Chancellor. Probably surprise us. If there's something big in it, it's going to be a surprise. I think Mr. Hammond is something of a small c conservative, but he is clearly one who has got a degree of flexibility in what he's doing. So back last autumn he did two things. One was that he increased investment spending really quite significantly. He abandoned George Osborne's fiscal rules, and he provided more money where he thought it was needed, which is particularly at that time for prisons. In the spring budget, he increased spending on social care where there was real pressure. So he's open to the fact that there are pressures in public services, but he still, I think, wants to keep as much of a lid as he can on borrowing. The Office of Budget Responsibility has a really tough job to do because it has to project the economy and the public finances out over the next 5 years whilst having very little sense of what leaving the European Union is going to look like. I think what it's assuming is that we're going to have a relatively smooth, relatively benign move out of the European Union, probably without too great a disruption to trade. And there's probably not much else it can assume. It has to have a single central forecast at the moment. But there are clearly risks around that. There is clearly a risk that the deal that we come to, or the lack of deal that we come to, will be worse than that. And certainly in the short to medium run, that will then have an additional negative impact on growth. Productivity is a tough thing to increase, particularly in the short run, but we do know some things that do have a positive impact in the long run. First is infrastructure, building roads, for example, ensuring we have a third runway at Heathrow, for example, increasing house building, reducing planning restrictions. All of those things we actually know will work, and governments decide not to do them. The other thing that's really, really important is the education system, where again the governments recognise how important it is, but have struggled actually to find the right way to reform it to provide the kinds of skills that we need.